Abrasive Vices in denial.
In the heart of the Roman Empire, a world forged by strength and ambition, a boy was born who seemed to embody neither. This is the story of Tiberius Claudius Drusus, the child who would one day become Emperor Claudius, a man whose early life was a constant battle against scorn and infirmity. Imagine the bustling, unforgiving streets of Rome. Power was everything. Appearance was everything. And young Claudius, born in Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon, France, on the 1st of August, 10 BC, possessed little of what his society valued. He was a member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, one of the most powerful families in history. His father was the celebrated general Nero Claudius Drusus, and his mother, Antonia Minor, was the daughter of the legendary Mark Antony. His brother was the beloved Germanicus, a military hero destined for greatness. By birthright, Claudius should have been at the center of Roman life. But nature had dealt him a cruel hand. From a young age, he was plagued by a host of ailments. We don't know the exact diagnosis, but contemporary accounts, including his own, describe a persistent limp, a slight deafness, a stutter, and an uncontrollable trembling of his head. When he was excited or angry, his symptoms worsened. He would drool, his nose would run, and his speech would become a jumble of unintelligible sounds. In an era that idolized physical perfection, Claudius was seen as a defective product of a noble line. The judgment from his own family was swift and merciless. His mother, Antonia, allegedly called him a monster of a man, not finished, but merely begun by Dame Nature. She would use him as a benchmark for stupidity. If she wanted to call someone an idiot, she'd say they were a bigger fool than my Claudius. Think about that for a moment. The person who should have been his staunchest defender was his harshest critic. His own grandmother, Livia, the formidable wife of Emperor Augustus, couldn't even bear to speak to him directly, preferring to communicate through letters or intermediaries. Even the great Augustus, the first Roman emperor, was deeply troubled by his grandnephew. We have letters he wrote to Livia, where he frets over what to do with Claudius. He acknowledged the boy had a surprising clarity of mind when he was calm, but his public appearances were a disaster. Augustus concluded that Claudius could never hold public office, that he would be a constant source of embarrassment to the imperial family. He was, in their eyes, a disgrace. He was hidden away, excluded from public life, and denied the traditional path of a young Roman nobleman. While his peers were training for the Senate and the military, Claudius was kept in the shadows. This constant dismissal had a profound effect. Imagine being the butt of every joke. The family secret everyone wished would just disappear. He was ridiculed for his gait, mocked for his stutter. He was the awkward, clumsy boy in the corner, while his handsome, charismatic brother Germanicus was celebrated as the future of Rome. The psychological toll must have been immense. Yet this isolation became his unlikely salvation. Shunned by the political elite and barred from a military career, Claudius turned to the one world that would accept him, the world of books. He retreated into the libraries and archives, finding solace in the company of scrolls and scholars. With nothing but time on his hands, he became a voracious reader and a dedicated student of history. He studied the Etruscans, the Carthaginians, and the deep history of Rome itself. He wasn't just reading, he was writing. He penned a multi-volume history of Rome, a history of Carthage, and an Etruscan dictionary. Sadly, none of these works survive today, but their existence tells us something vital. While the world saw a fool, a quiet, formidable intellect was being forged in the shadows. His tutor, the historian Livy, one of the greatest writers of the age, recognized his potential and encouraged his academic pursuits. This education gave Claudius something no one could take away: knowledge. He understood the mechanics of Roman law, the lessons of past triumphs and failures, and the intricate web of political alliances better than most of the men who openly mocked him. He was developing a deep understanding of the empire he was forbidden from helping to govern. This period of his life is a portrait of paradox. He was a prince living in obscurity, an intellectual dismissed as an imbecile. The Roman elite, so focused on the superficial, on physical prowess and smooth oratory, were completely blind to the substance of the man. They saw a stammering, limping boy and assumed his mind was as crippled as his body. They created a caricature of Claudius, and it was this caricature that, ironically, would save his life. As the reigns of Augustus, Tiberius, and then the mad Caligula unfolded, the imperial court became a snake pit of intrigue, purges, and assassinations. Ambitious men were seen as threats and were often eliminated. Claudius, however, was never considered a threat. Why would anyone bother to assassinate the family idiot? His perceived weakness was his shield. While his relatives and their allies fell victim to paranoia and political maneuvering, Claudius survived. He was the fool, the drunkard, the harmless scholar. No one paid him any mind. He was the last person anyone would have picked to rule the world. A fragile child, an awkward youth, a man defined by what he couldn't do rather than what he could. His family saw him as a blemish, a footnote in their grand story. Rome overlooked him entirely. They had no idea that this overlooked boy, this unlikely survivor, was observing, learning, and waiting. The stage was being set for one of history's most improbable rises to power. The boy they all dismissed would soon have the last laugh, and the fate of the Roman Empire would rest in his trembling hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the early life of Claudius. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible tale. See you next time. Have you ever felt like you were living in someone else's shadow? Like no matter what you did, you could never quite measure up? Well, imagine that shadow being cast by the most powerful family in the entire Roman Empire. That was the world of the young Claudius. Welcome back to our journey through the life of one of Rome's most underestimated emperors. In Chapter 2, we're diving into what it was like for Claudius, living in the shadow of greatness. Picture this. Your father is Drusus the Elder, one of Rome's most beloved and respected generals. A man so popular, legends whispered he might one day restore the Republic. Your brother is Germanicus, the golden boy of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, handsome, charismatic, a military hero in his own right, destined for the throne. Your uncle is Tiberius, the reigning emperor, and your granduncle was the legendary Augustus himself. Everywhere Claudius looked, he saw giants. And then there was Claudius. Frail, often ill, he walked with a limp and had a stutter. In an empire that prized physical perfection and military prowess as signs of a strong leader, Claudius was seen as an embarrassment. His own mother, Antonia, reportedly called him a monstrosity of a man, not finished but merely begun by nature. Harsh, right? Can you imagine hearing that from your own mom? Because of these perceived weaknesses, the imperial family made a decision. They would hide him. While his peers were being groomed for military commands and political office, Claudius was deliberately sidelined. He was kept out of the public eye, denied the traditional career path of a Roman nobleman. He wasn't allowed to hold any significant office or even sit in the Senate for years. He was the family secret, the awkward relative you hope doesn't show up at the big family dinner. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. While his family was busy with the grand, dangerous game of Roman politics, a game of intrigue, backstabbing, and poison, Claudius found refuge in a different world. He turned to books. He wasn't just reading. He was devouring them. He became a scholar, a historian, tutored by some of the greatest minds of his time, including the famous historian Livy. Shut away from the halls of power, Claudius dedicated himself to chronicling the past. He wrote extensive histories of the Etruscans and the Carthaginian civilizations that Rome had conquered. Think about that for a second. While his family celebrated Roman dominance, Claudius was studying their vanquished enemies, trying to understand their cultures, their languages, their perspectives. This gave him an incredibly unique viewpoint, one that was far broader than that of his politically ambitious relatives. He wasn't just some amateur, either. He was a serious, dedicated academic. He even proposed adding 3 new letters to the Latin alphabet to better represent certain sounds of testament to his deep linguistic studies. Of course, the political elite probably just saw it as another one of poor Claudius's eccentric hobbies. They laughed at him, they pitied him, they underestimated him. And that, as we will soon see, was the biggest mistake they ever made. This period of forced isolation became his greatest strength. While others learned the art of political maneuvering, Claudius learned the lessons of history. While they practiced their sword skills, he sharpened his mind. He observed the brutal rise and fall of those around him, the paranoia of Tiberius, the madness of Caligula, all from a safe distance. He was a spectator to the chaos, quietly absorbing, learning, and surviving. His family saw him as a fool, unfit for public life. But in their attempt to sideline him, they accidentally gave him the perfect education for an emperor. He wasn't corrupted by power because he never had any. He wasn't blinded by ambition, because he was told he could have none. He was simply a student of history, living through one of its most turbulent chapters. So, while Claudius lived in the shadow of giants, he was quietly growing into one himself, not on the battlefield, but in the library. He was forging a different kind of strength, one based on knowledge, observation, and an understanding of human nature that his more successful relatives tragically lacked. They saw a weak link. In reality, he was the only one in the chain who truly understood its structure. This chapter of his life is a powerful reminder that greatness can be found in the most unexpected places. The very things that others see as weaknesses can become the source of our greatest strengths. Claudius's early life wasn't a tragedy. It was a long, intensive training montage for the incredible events that were to come. What do you think? Does this overlooked period of his life change your perception of him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Join us next time as the shadows deepen and a twist of fate thrusts the forgotten scholar into the heart of the storm. Thanks for watching, and if you're enjoying this historical deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss Chapter 3. See you then! Welcome back to our journey through the life of one of Rome's most underestimated emperors. Last time, we saw young Claudius navigating the treacherous currents of the imperial family. Today, in Chapter 3, we enter the quiet world of the scholar in the palace. Picture the scene. In the heart of Rome, a city pulsating with ambition, where senators and soldiers scheme for power and influence, one member of the imperial family is conspicuously absent from the fray. This isn't a man plotting in the shadows or jockeying for position at lavish banquets. No, this is Claudius, and you're far more likely to find him tucked away in a library, surrounded by scrolls, his world defined not by political intrigue, but by the rustle of papyrus and the scent of old ink. While his contemporaries, like the dashing Germanicus or the menacing Sejanus, were chasing military glory and political dominance, Claudius was chasing something else entirely: knowledge. He became a recluse by choice, a scholar in a world of warriors. His companions were not powerful allies but the silent voices of historians, poets, and philosophers. He devoted himself to books with a passion that others reserved for power. It was seen as a weakness, a sign that he was unfit for the brutal game of Roman politics. But was it? Or was he perhaps playing a much longer game? Claudius wasn't just a casual reader. He was a serious academic. He dove headfirst into the study of languages, mastering not just the refined Latin of the elite and the Greek of the scholars, but also delving into more obscure tongues. He famously became one of the last people who could read and understand Etruscan, the ancient language of the people who predated the Romans in Italy. He even attempted to add new letters to the Latin alphabet to better represent its sounds, a testament to his deep linguistic curiosity. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a profound connection to the very roots of Roman and Italian identity. His greatest passion, however, was history. He wasn't just reading the established accounts of Livy or Sallust. He was writing his own. Claudius penned massive, multi-volume works on the history of the Etruscans and the Carthaginians. Think about that for a moment. In an empire built on conquest, here was an imperial prince dedicating his life to understanding the stories of Rome's greatest historical enemies. He didn't just see them as vanquished foes. He saw them as complex civilizations with their own laws, traditions, and rich histories worth preserving. He was fascinated by the intricate tapestry of cultures that Rome had absorbed, from the Gauls in the north to the Egyptians in the south. This wasn't just trivia. This was a deep dive into the very mechanics of civilization. Through his study of Roman traditions, he gained an unparalleled understanding of the Mos Maiorum, the way of the ancestors, the unwritten code of conduct and values that formed the bedrock of the Roman Republic. He pored over legal texts, tracing the evolution of Roman law from the 12 tables to the complex edicts of his own time. While others learned how to command a legion, Claudius was learning what made Rome asterisk. He understood its institutions, its precedents, and its legal foundations better than almost anyone. Imagine the sheer volume of information he was absorbing. Day after day, year after year, he was building a mental database of precedents, legal arguments, historical parallels, and cultural nuances. This bookish prince, the one everyone dismissed, was quietly becoming an expert on the very machinery of the state he was supposedly unfit to lead. He learned about provincial administration not from a governor's report, but from studying the history of how that province was conquered and integrated. He learned about diplomacy not from attending state dinners, but from reading the treaties and chronicles of past alliances and conflicts. His family saw his academic pursuits as, at best, a harmless eccentricity and at worst, a confirmation of his inadequacy. They let him be. The scholar in the palace was no threat. He wasn't building loyal armies or conspiring with senators. He was just reading. But in those quiet rooms, surrounded by the wisdom of the ages, Claudius was forging the very tools he would need to survive and eventually to rule. He was learning how to be an administrator, a judge, and a statesman, all from the pages of history. This period of his life is crucial. It explains so much of what comes later. When he unexpectedly becomes emperor, he isn't a clueless novice. He is, in fact, one of the most knowledgeable men to ever take the throne. His later judicial reforms, his interest in public works, his careful management of the province, all of these can be traced back to the decades he spent as a scholar. The knowledge he gained wasn't just theoretical. It was practical wisdom, a deep understanding of cause and effect in the grand sweep of history. The man everyone laughed at was, in secret, receiving the most comprehensive education an emperor could ever hope for. He wasn't just reading about the past. He was preparing for the future. And that future would arrive with a sudden, violent, and unexpected turn of events, which will thrust our reluctant scholar from the library straight onto the imperial throne. The story of how that happens is what we'll uncover in our next chapter. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the life of Claudius. If you're enjoying this series and want to see how the bookish prince becomes a powerful emperor, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode. Your support means the world and allows me to keep making these videos. Until next time, stay curious. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the life of Claudius. Today, we delve into one of the most treacherous periods in Roman history, the reign of Emperor Caligula. For Claudius, these were years of walking on eggshells, a time when his perceived inadequacies became his greatest shield. When Gaius, better known to history as Caligula, ascended to the throne in 37 AD, the Roman populace was filled with hope. He was the son of the beloved general Germanicus, and his initial months as emperor were promising. He granted bonuses to the military, abolished unpopular taxes, and released those unjustly imprisoned by his predecessor, Tiberius. It seemed a golden age was dawning. For Claudius, this change was monumental. Caligula was his nephew, and for the first time, Claudius was brought out of the shadows and given a public role. Caligula appointed him as his co-consul, an incredible honor that thrust the 46-year-old Claudius into the heart of Roman politics. Imagine the scene. Claudius, who had spent his entire life being told he was unfit for public office, now sitting beside the emperor himself. For a moment, it must have felt like a vindication. He was finally being recognized. He participated in public ceremonies, a visible if somewhat awkward figure beside the young, charismatic emperor. However, this newfound prominence came with a heavy price. Caligula's favor was as unpredictable as a summer storm, and his affection often took the form of cruel mockery. The court of Caligula was a dangerous playground, and Claudius was often the main attraction. The historian Suetonius tells us that Caligula would frequently make his uncle the butt of jokes. If Claudius arrived late to a dinner party, the other guests were encouraged to trip him. If he dozed off after a meal, which he often did, they would pelt him with olive and date pits. He was made to pay enormous sums to enter priestly colleges, driving him into such debt that he had to mortgage his estates to moneylenders. Why did Caligula treat his uncle this way? It was likely a complex mix of casual cruelty and a twisted form of affection. Caligula enjoyed humiliating the powerful senators and elites, and making his awkward, stammering uncle a co-consul was a way of showing contempt for the traditional aristocracy. By elevating the man they all looked down on, Caligula was reminding them that his power was absolute. Claudius became a living symbol of the emperor's whim. He was a court jester in a consul's toga. Despite the constant humiliation, Claudius played his part with a quiet diligence that became his signature survival tactic. He never fought back. He never showed resentment. He would often laugh along with his tormentors, making himself seem even more harmless and foolish. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the lethal nature of Caligula's paranoia. To be seen as ambitious or intelligent was a death sentence in that court. Claudius's limp, his stammer, and his seemingly slow wit, the very things that had held him back his entire life, were now his armor. He was the fool, and in the court of a madman, the fool was one of the few who might be spared. As Caligula's reign descended further into madness, this strategy became even more critical. The emperor declared himself a living god, demanding that senators worship him. He had conversations with the moon and planned to make his favorite horse, Incitatus, a consul. He executed senators on a whim, confiscated their property, and terrorized the elite. The atmosphere in the palace was thick with fear. Every day, nobles would attend the emperor, not knowing if they would return home. Throughout this reign of terror, Claudius remained in the background. He was the harmless old uncle, the butt of the joke, the man nobody took seriously. While others were being executed for perceived slights or signs of ambition, Claudius was busy tripping over his own feet or falling asleep at banquets. His apparent incompetence was his invisibility cloak. He saw the plots forming against Caligula. He heard the whispered resentments, but he kept his head down. He knew that to be noticed was to be in danger. For example, when Caligula decided to bridge the Bay of Naples with a 2-mile-long pontoon bridge, a ridiculously extravagant project, he forced the nobility to attend the celebration. He then, in a fit of rage, ordered many of them to be thrown into the sea. We can only imagine Claudius, present at such events, trying to make himself as small as possible, his heart pounding, hoping the emperor's gaze wouldn't fall on him. He survived by being utterly forgettable. This period teaches us a profound lesson about power and survival. Claudius wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't stand up to the tyrant. He didn't lead a rebellion. He survived. He endured the humiliation, swallowed his pride, and played the part that was assigned to him. He was a scholar, a student of history, and he likely saw parallels between Caligula and the tyrants of the past. He knew that such reigns, fueled by paranoia and excess, rarely last. His strategy was one of patience. And then, in January of 41 AD, the inevitable happened. After 4 years of his tyrannical rule, a conspiracy finally succeeded. Officers of the Praetorian Guard, led by Cassius Cerere, whom Caligula had relentlessly mocked, assassinated the emperor. The palace was thrown into chaos. Senators saw an opportunity to restore the republic, while the Praetorian Guard saw a chance to secure their own power. And where was Claudius during all this? According to the famous account, he was found hiding behind a curtain in the palace, trembling with fear. He was convinced that he would be the next to be killed. He had survived the reign of a monster, only to be caught in the violent aftermath of his death. But what happened next would change his life, and the course of Roman history, forever. A soldier pulled back the curtain, saw the cowering uncle of the dead emperor, and instead of killing him, hailed him as the new emperor. We'll explore that incredible moment and the beginning of Claudius's own reign in our next chapter. How did this man, known only for his infirmities and his ability to blend into the background, suddenly find himself in charge of the most powerful empire in the world? The answer is more complex and fascinating than you might think. Thank you so much for joining me for this part of Claudius's story. It's a testament to how the skills needed to survive are not always the ones we traditionally admire. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. We'll see you next time as we witness the accidental rise of Emperor Claudius. Picture this: Rome, January 24th, 41 CE. The air on Palatine Hill is thick with tension. A stark contrast to the festive atmosphere of the Palatine Games. The Emperor, Caligula, a man whose name has become synonymous with tyranny and madness, has just left the theater. He's walking through a private corridor, a secluded passage beneath the palace. He's surrounded by his personal guard, the very men sworn to protect him. But loyalty in Rome is a fragile commodity, and for some, patience has run out. Suddenly, the corridor erupts into chaos. Cassius Cerere, a tribune of the Praetorian Guard, a man Caligula had relentlessly mocked, steps forward. The first blow strikes. It's a signal. The conspirators, a mix of senators and guardsmen fed up with Caligula's cruelty and unpredictability, descend upon the emperor. It's a brutal, frenzied attack. In moments, the most powerful man in the world lies dead on the stone floor, his reign of terror brought to a violent end. News of the assassination spreads through the palace like wildfire, sparking panic and confusion. Senators, once cowed by Caligula, now dream of restoring the republic. Praetorian Guards, their loyalty now for sale. stormed through the imperial residence, looting and searching for anyone connected to the fallen emperor. They are a force of chaos, unsure of their next move, driven by greed and fear. Who will rule now? Will the Senate seize control? Or will the military make its own king? The future of the Roman Empire hangs precariously in the balance. Amidst this pandemonium, a lone soldier, a Praetorian named Gratus, notices something odd. A pair of feet peeking out from beneath a heavy curtain in a secluded corner of the palace. Curious, or perhaps hoping to find some hidden treasure, he yanks the curtain aside. Cowering there, trembling uncontrollably, is a man in his early 50s. He's pale, his limbs shake, and he stammers, expecting the flash of a sword to be his last sight. This is Tiberius Claudius Nero Germanicus, Caligula's uncle. But Claudius is not who you'd picture as a member of the imperial family. For his entire life, he's been the family's awkward secret. Afflicted with a limp, a slight deafness, and a persistent stammer, he was considered an embarrassment. His own mother, Antonia, called him a monster of a man, not finished but merely begun by nature. He was kept out of the public eye, ridiculed, and deemed unfit for public office. While others played the great game of Roman politics, Claudius retreated into the world of books, becoming a respected but obscure historian. He survived the purges of Tiberius and the madness of Caligula simply because no one ever saw him as a threat. He was just poor Uncle Claudius. As Gratus pulls him from his hiding spot, Claudius falls to his knees, begging for his life. He is convinced his time is up, that the assassins are simply mopping up the last remnants of the imperial line. But Gratus and the other soldiers who gather around don't see a man to be killed. They see an opportunity. They see the last adult male of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Killing him would end the imperial system they depended on for their power and pay. But an emperor they create themselves? An emperor who would owe them everything. That was a very different proposition. Instead of a sword, what Claudius hears is the most shocking sound imaginable: the cheers of the soldiers. They lift the terrified scholar onto their shoulders. "Hail, Emperor!" They shout. They carry him, stammering and bewildered, through the chaotic palace and into the safety of the Praetorian camp. Claudius, the man who had spent his life trying to be invisible, was now the center of the Roman universe. He hadn't sought power. He hadn't plotted or schemed. Power had literally found him cowering behind a curtain. Meanwhile, the Senate is deliberating. They believe they have the upper hand. With Caligula gone, they are making bold speeches about liberty and the restoration of the old republic. They talk of erasing the memory of the Caesars and returning power to the people, or rather, to themselves. They are completely unaware that the Praetorian Guard has already made its own decision. The game has changed, and they don't even know it. The standoff is tense. The Senate has the authority of tradition, but the Praetorians have the swords. For a moment, it seems civil war is inevitable. The Senate sends envoys, demanding Claudius step aside. But the guard surrounding their newfound emperor is resolute. They have their man, and they are not letting him go. Claudius, caught in the middle, is likely still in a state of shock. The historian who studied power is now its unwilling vessel. What happens next is a masterclass in pragmatism. Claudius, guided by his friends and the Praetorian prefects, makes a decisive move. He promises every soldier in the Praetorian Guard a massive bonus 15,000 sesterces each. It's the first time an emperor has essentially bought the loyalty of the army, and it sets a dangerous precedent for the future. But in that moment, it's a brilliant stroke. Money speaks louder than ideals of republican liberty. A soldier's loyalty is cemented. Faced with a united and paid-for military, the Senate's position crumbles. Their support evaporates. One by one, the senators slip away, realizing the republic they dreamed of was just a fleeting fantasy. Reluctantly, they have no choice but to officially grant Claudius the imperial powers. The purple toga, the symbol of supreme authority, is draped over the shoulders of the man they had all dismissed as a fool. And so Tiberius Claudius Nero Germanicus, the forgotten prince, the family joke, the trembling historian found behind a curtain, becomes the fourth emperor of Rome. It's one of history's greatest ironies. The man deemed least likely to rule, the one who survived by being underestimated, now holds the fate of the known world in his hands. His accession was a bizarre accident, a fluke born from assassination and military opportunism. But what kind of emperor would this unlikely scholar be? No one knew, least of all Claudius himself. The stage was set for one of the most surprising and effective reigns in Roman history. Thank you so much for watching. It's a truly incredible story, isn't it? If you enjoyed this journey back in time, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the ancient world. Let me know in the comments what you think about Claudius's rise to power. We'll see you in the next chapter of history. Have you ever felt like an underdog, thrust into a position you never asked for with everyone doubting you? That's exactly where our man Claudius finds himself. After the chaotic assassination of his nephew, Caligula, the last thing anyone expected was for the 50-year-old, limping, stuttering Claudius to become the next emperor of Rome. Imagine the scene. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers of the emperor, find him hiding behind a curtain, trembling. Instead of killing him, they do something utterly astonishing. They proclaim him emperor. Why? Well, he was the last adult male of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. For the guards, he was a known quantity, a link to the revered Augustus, and more importantly, someone they believed they could control. They paraded him back to their camp, effectively making him the first emperor chosen by the army, not the Senate. This act sent shockwaves through the Roman Senate. For a brief, intoxicating moment, the senators had dared to dream of restoring the Republic. They debated furiously, some even putting their own names forward as potential leaders. They saw Claudius as a fool, a puppet, someone completely unfit to rule the vast Roman Empire. They despised the Praetorian Guard for making such a monumental decision without their consent. The Senate's message was clear. They did not want Claudius. They saw his ascension not as a legitimate succession but as a military coup. This set the stage for one of the most tense political standoffs in Roman history. On one side, you had the armed might of the Praetorian Guard, with Claudius as their chosen leader. On the other, the traditional, powerful, and deeply resentful Senate. Claudius, despite his physical frailties and scholarly demeanor, was no fool. He understood the precariousness of his situation. His life and the stability of Rome hung in the balance. How do you win over a room full of powerful men who think you a joke and resent your very existence? Claudius's first moves were a masterclass in political maneuvering. He knew his primary power base was the army. So he secured their loyalty with a massive bonus, donative asterisk, promising each Praetorian Guard a huge sum of money. This was an unprecedented move, setting a dangerous precedent for future emperors. But for Claudius, it was a matter of survival. He was buying loyalty, and it worked. With the Praetorians firmly in his corner, the Senate's position weakened considerably. They had the historical authority, but Claudius had the swords. Faced with the unwavering support of the military for Claudius, the Senate had no choice but to back down. They reluctantly confirmed his titles and powers. But this was far from a happy resolution. The relationship was poisoned from the start. Claudius knew he couldn't rule by force alone. He needed the Senate's cooperation to govern effectively, so began his delicate balancing act. He showed immense respect for the institution of the Senate, attending their meetings, consulting them on matters of state, and reviving old traditions. He wanted to project an image of a traditional Roman magistrate, working in partnership with the Senate, just as Augustus had. He refused many of the extravagant honors offered to him, trying to appear humble and dedicated to the state, not his own glory. At the same time, Claudius wasn't afraid to innovate. He recognized the empire's administration was creaky and inefficient. He relied heavily on his trusted freedmen men, who were technically former slaves, appointing them to powerful positions as his personal secretaries, managing the empire's finances, correspondence, and legal affairs. This was a radical departure from tradition. The aristocratic senators were scandalized. They saw these freedmen, like Narcissus and Pallas, as upstarts and were deeply resentful of their influence. To them, it was an insult that these men, who were not even true Romans in their eyes, held more sway with the emperor than they did. This created a parallel, more efficient bureaucracy that answered directly to Claudius, allowing him to bypass the often obstructive Senate. This dual approach defined his reign. He would publicly defer to the Senate, upholding the facade of the old republic, while privately building a powerful, centralized administration that gave him direct control over the empire. It was a strategy born of necessity. He couldn't trust the senators who had initially wanted him dead, so he created a system that made them less relevant. He also embarked on a massive program of public works. He built new aqueducts, the Aqua Claudia and Anio Novus, which solved Rome's water shortage problems for centuries. He also constructed a new port at Ostia, a massive and risky engineering project to secure the city's vital grain supply. These projects weren't just for show. They addressed real, pressing needs and demonstrated his competence as a ruler. He was showing, not just telling, the people of Rome that he was a capable leader. Claudius also took a keen personal interest in the justice system. He would often preside over court cases himself, sometimes for hours on end. While his contemporaries sometimes mocked his rulings as eccentric, his goal was to provide swift and fair justice for ordinary citizens. He wanted to be seen as an accessible emperor, one who cared about the problems of his people, not a distant, divine figure like Caligula. This hands-on approach, combined with his ambitious building projects and administrative reforms, slowly began to change public opinion. The people of Rome, who benefited from the stable grain supply, clean water, and accessible courts, started to see the stuttering scholar in a new light. He was proving to be a surprisingly effective and conscientious emperor. However, the threat from the Senate never truly disappeared. Throughout his reign, Claudius faced numerous plots and conspiracies, many of them originating from disgruntled senators who could never accept his rule. This constant threat made him deeply suspicious, sometimes even paranoid. His reign saw a number of executions and forced suicides of prominent senators, which only deepened the animosity between them. It was a vicious cycle. The Senate's hostility fueled Claudius's paranoia, and his harsh responses fueled their hatred. He was caught in an impossible position trying to be a traditionalist emperor for an institution that rejected him, while simultaneously being a pragmatic innovator to actually run the empire. So this hesitant beginning set the tone for Claudius's entire 13-year reign. It was a period of incredible contradiction. An emperor who stumbled into power but ruled with surprising skill. A man who respected tradition but relied on radical innovation. A ruler who sought partnership but was forced into a state of near-constant conflict with the elite. He consolidated his power not through charisma or military glory, but through careful planning, practical problem-solving, and a healthy dose of political cunning. The cautious start of Claudius's reign shows us that sometimes the most unlikely leaders are the ones who achieve the most, proving that it's not how you start the race that matters but how you run it. Thank you so much for watching. This early part of Claudius's story is just fascinating, isn't it? If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We've got a lot more to uncover about this incredible emperor. See you next time. Welcome back, history buffs. We've seen Claudius, the man everyone underestimated, unexpectedly become the most powerful person in the Roman world. So what happens now? Does the scholar, the supposed fool, crumble under the weight of the empire? Far from it. In fact, Claudius is about to launch one of the most ambitious reform programs Rome has ever seen. This is the story of how the Forgotten Prince rebuilt the heart of the empire. When Claudius took the throne, the Roman bureaucracy was, to put it mildly, a mess. It was an old system, reliant on senators and equestrians who often saw public service as a path to personal enrichment rather than a duty. It was inefficient, slow, and riddled with corruption. Claudius knew this couldn't continue. The empire was too vast, its problems too complex, for such an amateurish administration. He needed a professional, efficient system, loyal to him and him alone. His solution was both brilliant and, for the Roman elite, absolutely scandalous. Claudius turned to a group of people the Roman aristocracy despised, but who were often highly educated and skilled, his own imperial freedmen. These were former slaves from his household, men who owed him everything, their freedom, their wealth, their position. They had no ancient family name to fall back on, no senatorial power base. Their loyalty was to Claudius, and their success was tied directly to the success of the emperor. He essentially created a cabinet, a personal civil service, to run the empire. Let's meet the key players in this new government. First, there was Narcissus, who served as Claudius's chief secretary, handling all official correspondence. Think of him as the emperor's chief of staff, the gatekeeper to the most powerful man in the world. Then there was Paulus, who was put in charge of the empire's finances, the imperial treasury. This was an incredibly powerful position, controlling the vast wealth flowing into Rome from across its provinces. Finally, there was Callistus, who managed the justice system, handling petitions and legal cases brought before the emperor. Together, these men formed a powerful executive team that answered only to Claudius. The efficiency they brought was undeniable. Decisions were made faster, policies were implemented more effectively, and the day-to-day business of the empire ran more smoothly than ever before. Under their management, the administration became a well-oiled machine. They created specialized departments, or scrinia, each responsible for a different aspect of governance, from finance to justice to public works. This was the birth of a true centralized bureaucracy, a model that would influence governments for centuries to come. But oh, the controversy! The Roman senators were furious. For generations, they had seen these top administrative roles as their birthright. Now, they were being forced to go through former slaves to get anything done. They saw these freakmen, men like Pallas and Narcissus, as arrogant, greedy, and far too powerful. The historian Tacitus, writing from the perspective of the senatorial class, drips with contempt when he describes them. He accuses them of amassing obscene fortunes and wielding their influence for personal gain. While there was likely some truth to the accusations of wealth accumulation, these men did become fabulously rich. It's also clear that much of the criticism was fueled by pure snobbery and resentment. The elite couldn't stand seeing men they considered their inferiors holding such immense power. Claudius, however, stood by his men. He understood that their loyalty and efficiency were indispensable. He trusted their counsel and relied on their skills to enact his ambitious agenda. This new bureaucracy allowed Claudius to bypass the often obstructive Senate and govern directly, strengthening the power of the emperor and centralizing control in a way his predecessors, Augustus and Tiberius, had only dreamed of. Beyond administrative reform, Claudius had a deep and personal commitment to law and justice. This wasn't just about political power. It was about creating a fairer, more stable society. Unlike emperors who might hear a few high-profile cases for show, Claudius was known for his tireless dedication to the courts. He would personally preside over legal tribunals for hours on end, sometimes even through the night. He listened patiently to every case, from disputes over property to complex citizenship claims. He had a reputation for being meticulous, sometimes to a fault. Ancient sources tell us he would often interrupt lawyers to ask probing questions, showing off his own deep knowledge of the law. While some mocked him for this, the common people of Rome loved it. They saw an emperor who genuinely cared about justice for the ordinary citizen, not just the wealthy and powerful. He passed numerous laws aimed at protecting the vulnerable, including regulations that gave slaves more rights if they were sick or abandoned by their masters. He also streamlined legal procedures to make the courts more accessible and efficient for everyone. For Claudius, the law was the foundation of the Roman state, and he was determined to be its most diligent guardian. But Claudius knew that a great empire wasn't just built on laws and bureaucracy. It was built on stone and water. His reign saw one of the most significant periods of public works construction in Roman history. His most ambitious project was the port of Ostia. Rome, a city of nearly 1 million people, was fed by grain shipments from Egypt and North Africa. But its port at the mouth of the Tiber River was notoriously dangerous and prone to silting up. Every winter, storms threatened the grain fleet, and a single disaster could lead to famine and riots in the capital. Claudius tackled this problem head-on. He ordered the construction of a massive new artificial harbor just north of Ostia. It was an incredible feat of engineering. A huge basin was dredged, protected by 2 enormous curved moles or breakwaters reaching out into the sea. At the entrance, a massive lighthouse was built on top of a giant ship that had been intentionally sunk and filled with concrete. This new harbor, Portus, could shelter hundreds of ships, ensuring a stable and secure grain supply for Rome, regardless of the weather. It was a lifeline for the city, a project that secured Claudius's legacy as a great builder. And that wasn't all. Claudius also addressed Rome's chronic water shortage. He completed 2 massive aqueducts that had been started by Caligula, the Aqua Claudia and the Annu Novus. These were engineering marvels, stretching for miles across the countryside on towering arches, bringing millions of gallons of fresh, clean water into the city every day. This improved public health, supplied the city's many fountains and public baths, and was a clear, visible symbol of the emperor's power and his care for his people. Every time a Roman drew water from a fountain, they were reminded of the emperor who provided for them. So let's step back. The fool, the scholar, the man who stumbled into power, had in just a few years completely reformed the Roman administration, dedicated himself to the fair application of justice, and built infrastructure projects that would serve Rome for centuries. He created a professional civil service, secured the city's food and water supply, and cemented the power of the emperor. He was proving to be not just a survivor but one of the most effective and consequential rulers Rome had ever known. But power in Rome is a dangerous game, and Claudius's greatest challenges were yet to come, not from the Senate or the frontiers, but from within his own family. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the life of Emperor Claudius. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Roman history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We love hearing from you, so leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Last time we explored Claudius's surprising rise to power. Today, in Chapter 8, we're shifting our focus from the political intrigue to the very bricks and mortar of the Roman Empire. We're talking about Claudius, the great builder of Rome. When you think of the great builders of ancient Rome, names like Augustus or Trajan might spring to mind. But Claudius, often underestimated, was one of the most prolific and practical builders the city had ever seen. He didn't just erect monuments for vanity. He built infrastructure that would serve the Roman people for centuries, fundamentally transforming their daily lives and securing the empire's future. His reign was a construction boom, an era of ambitious projects that solved real-world problems. So, what did he build? Imagine being a Roman citizen around the year 40 AD. The city is growing at an incredible rate, with a population pushing 1 million people. This massive population needs two things above all else: water and food. Claudius understood this better than anyone. His most celebrated projects directly tackled these essential needs. He initiated the construction of two monumental aqueducts, the Aqua Claudia and the Anio Novus. These weren't just pipes. They were engineering marvels, colossal structures that snaked across the countryside for dozens of miles. Let's start with the Aqua Claudia. Construction actually began under his predecessor, Caligula, but it was Claudius who saw it through to completion over 14 years. This aqueduct was a masterpiece. Stretching over 45 miles, it carried fresh, pure spring water from the Subiaco Hills all the way to the heart of Rome. What made it truly spectacular was its final approach to the city. For the last several miles, it was carried atop towering, graceful arches, some reaching over 100 feet high. You can still see remnants of these arches today, a silent testament to Roman engineering genius. This wasn't just about providing drinking water. It was a statement of power, a visible symbol of Rome's ability to tame nature and provide for its citizens. Running right alongside it, often on the very same arches, was the Anio Novus. This was even longer, stretching nearly 54 miles. While its water wasn't as pure as the Aqua Claudia's, its sheer volume was staggering. Together, these two aqueducts dramatically increased Rome's water supply, feeding the city's countless fountains, public baths, and private homes. They improved public health, sanitation, and the overall quality of life. For the average Roman, this wasn't abstract policy. It was the fresh, clean water flowing from the neighborhood fountain, a direct result of their emperor's foresight. But Claudius knew that water alone wasn't enough. A city of 1 million people needs a constant, reliable supply of food, especially grain, which was the staple of the Roman diet. For centuries, Rome had relied on the port of Ostia, located at the mouth of the Tiber River. But Ostia had a major problem. It was an open roadstead, exposed to the sea and prone to silting up. Storms could wreck ships, and the shifting river mouth made navigation treacherous. This created a bottleneck that threatened Rome with frequent food shortages and famine, a recipe for civil unrest. Claudius embarked on a solution that was nothing short of audacious. A couple miles north of Ostia, he ordered the construction of a massive, artificial harbor known simply as portus, which means the harbor. This wasn't just a dock. It was a colossal feat of engineering. His engineers dredged a huge basin over 150 acres in size and built two massive, curving moles, or breakwaters, out into the sea to create a sheltered anchorage. At the entrance to this new harbor, Claudius placed a monumental lighthouse, one of the wonders of the ancient world. To create its foundation, he did something incredible. He took the gigantic ship that Caligula had built to transport an obelisk from Egypt, filled it with concrete and stone, and deliberately sank it on the seabed. This created an artificial island upon which the 4-story lighthouse was built, its beacon guiding ships safely into the harbor day and night. The completion of Portus was a game-changer. It allowed large grain ships from Egypt and Africa to dock safely, unload their cargo into warehouses, and then transfer it onto smaller river barges for the journey up the Tiber to Rome. The project was enormously expensive and took over a decade, but it secured Rome's food supply chain. It was a lifeline, an insurance policy against famine that stabilized the city and the empire. It was a direct investment in the well-being of every single Roman citizen. Claudius's vision extended beyond just water and grain. He was also a prolific builder and restorer of roads and canals throughout Italy and the provinces. A secure empire needed to move legions quickly, and a prosperous empire needed to move goods efficiently. Claudius understood the vital importance of this network. He funded the repair of existing roads and commissioned new ones, like the Via Claudia Augusta, which connected Italy with the northern province of Riccia. He even attempted a massive project to drain the Fucine Lake in central Italy to create a vast area of new, fertile farmland. While this project ultimately had limited success, it shows the sheer scale of his ambition. Through these projects, the towering arches of the Aqua Claudia, the secure basin of Portus, and the paved certainty of his roads, Claudius literally reshaped the landscape of the Roman world. He wasn't just an emperor. He was a master planner, an urban developer on an imperial scale. His buildings were practical, purposeful, and enduring. They solved critical problems and laid the groundwork for the empire's continued prosperity. So while he may be remembered for his stammer or the palace intrigue that surrounded him, Claudius's true legacy is written in stone and water. He was the emperor who gave Rome the water it needed to thrive and the harbor it needed to survive. He was without a doubt one of Rome's greatest builders. Thank you so much for joining me for this look into Claudius's incredible construction projects. Next time, we'll delve into his expansion of the empire, pushing the boundaries of Rome into a new mysterious land, Britain. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Last time, we saw how Claudius, against all odds, consolidated his power within the treacherous heart of Rome. But for an emperor, holding the throne is only half the battle. To truly secure a legacy, to be remembered alongside the likes of Caesar and Augustus, a ruler needed more than just political savvy. They needed glory. They needed conquest. And for Claudius, that meant looking beyond the established frontiers of the empire. For decades, the mighty Roman legions had patrolled the borders, maintaining the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, established by Augustus. Emperors like Tiberius had been content with this status quo, focusing on administration and defense rather than risky expansion. But Claudius was different. Perhaps it was the constant whispers that he was a weak, accidental emperor. Perhaps it was the shadow of his brilliant brother, Germanicus, a military hero beloved by the people. Whatever the reason, Claudius felt a deep, burning need to prove himself, not just as a competent administrator but as a conqueror in his own right. He dreamt of a triumph, a grand parade through the streets of Rome celebrating a victorious campaign, a spectacle that would silence his critics and etch his name into history. But where could such a victory be won? The German frontiers were a bloody stalemate, a quagmire that had swallowed legions whole. The East, with the Parthian Empire, was a complex and dangerous chess game. Claudius needed a target that was both prestigious and crucially achievable. And so, his gaze and the gaze of Rome turned northward across the churning waters of the Channel to a land shrouded in myth and mystery, the island of Britannia. To the Romans, Britain was the very edge of the known world. A land of dense forests, treacherous marshes, and fierce painted warriors who fought from speeding chariots. It was a place of druids and strange rituals, a misty island that even the great Julius Caesar had failed to fully subdue. Caesar had landed there, yes, nearly a century before Claudius's time. He'd won some battles, demanded tribute, and then left. His expeditions were more of a reconnaissance in force than a true conquest. The island had remained stubbornly independent, a tantalizing prize just beyond Rome's grasp. For Claudius, Britain was the perfect objective. Conquering it would be a monumental achievement, something that even the divine Caesar had not accomplished. It would bring new resources, new prestige, and a definitive military victory to his reign. The political calculus was also compelling. A foreign war would unite the public, distracting them from domestic troubles and focusing their loyalty on the emperor, their victorious commander-in-chief. It was a high-stakes gamble. The English Channel was notoriously dangerous, and the British tribes, though disunited, were known for their ferocious courage. A failure would be catastrophic, a humiliation that would likely cost Claudius his throne and his life. But the potential rewards were too great to ignore. The planning began in earnest. Claudius, ever the meticulous administrator, didn't rush. He gathered intelligence, studied Caesar's old campaign reports, and assembled a formidable invasion force. He knew he couldn't lead the army himself. He was no general. He needed a commander who was skilled, loyal, and capable. His choice fell upon a respected senator, an experienced general named Aulus Plautius. It was a wise selection. Claudius was given command of 4 legions, an enormous force of over 40,000 men, including auxiliary troops. This was no mere raid. This was a full-scale invasion, meticulously planned and intended for permanent occupation. The year is 43 AD. The legions are mustered on the coast of Gaul, ready to cross the Channel. But a problem arises, one that Claudius had not anticipated. The soldiers, these hardened veterans who had faced German tribesmen and desert nomads, were terrified. They had grown up with stories of the Oceanus, the vast, terrifying ocean that surrounded the world. To cross it seemed like an act against the gods, an intrusion into a forbidden, almost supernatural realm. The stories of Britain's savage warriors and eerie, mist-filled landscapes fueled their fear. The army refused to board the ships. A mutiny was brewing. This was a critical moment. If the invasion faltered here, on the beaches of Gaul, Claudius's grand ambition would collapse into a farce. Word of the mutiny reached Rome, and Claudius had to act. He dispatched one of his most trusted and influential freedmen, Narcissus, to deal with the situation. When Narcissus, a former slave, arrived to address the legions, the soldiers initially laughed at the idea of being lectured by him. But Narcissus was a powerful and persuasive speaker. He spoke to them, shaming their cowardice and reminding them of their duty and the glory that awaited. Legend has it that as the soldiers jeered, one of them shouted, "Io Saturnalia," referencing the festival where slaves and masters briefly switched roles. The joke broke the tension. The soldiers, their mood shifting, finally agreed to embark. The invasion was back on. Under the command of Aulus Plautius, the Roman fleet crossed the Channel in 3 divisions, landing unopposed on the shores of Kent. The Britons, led by the chieftains of the powerful Catuvelloni tribe, Togodumnus and Caratacus, had been expecting the invasion, but were caught off guard by the speed and location of the landing. They had miscalculated, expecting the Romans to land at a different spot. This initial error gave the Romans a crucial foothold on the island. The conquest of Britain had begun. The first major confrontation was a 2-day battle at a river, likely the Medway. The Britons, using their famous war chariots, fought with incredible bravery. They would race along the Roman lines, hurling javelins before leaping down to fight on foot. But Roman discipline and superior tactics ultimately won the day. The legions forded the river, engaged the British warriors in brutal close-quarters combat, and eventually broke their lines. It was a hard-fought but decisive victory for Rome. One of the British leaders, Togodumnus, was killed in the fighting, a major blow to the British resistance. With the main British force shattered, the path to the tribal capital of Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, lay open. This was the moment Claudius had been waiting for. Aulus Plautius sent a message to Rome, summoning the emperor to join his victorious army for the final push. This was pure political theater, but it was essential. Claudius needed to be seen as the conqueror. He traveled from Rome, bringing with him reinforcements and even war elephants, a terrifying and exotic sight meant to awe the Britons and impress the folks back home. Claudius arrived in Britain, took formal command of the army, and led the final assault on Camulodunum. The tribal capital fell with little resistance. In a carefully staged ceremony, Claudius accepted the surrender of 11 British kings. He spent only 16 days on the island, but it was enough. He had his victory. He had his conquest. He returned to Rome not as the stammering, overlooked scholar, but as a triumphant conqueror, the man who had added a vast mythical province to the Roman Empire. The Senate granted him a magnificent triumph and the honorific title Britannicus. His young son was also given the name, securing the family's association with this great victory for a generation. The Arch of Claudius was erected in Rome to commemorate the event, its inscription boasting that he had received the surrender of British kings without any loss and had been the first to bring barbarian peoples beyond the ocean under the sway of Rome. His dream of expansion had become a glorious reality. The conquest of Britain was incomplete. It would take another 4 decades of brutal fighting to fully pacify the province, but Claudius had achieved what he set out to do. He had his legacy. He had proven his worth in the most Roman way possible, through war and conquest. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter of our story. The invasion of Britain was a turning point in Claudius's reign, but the challenges for the empire, and for the emperor himself, were far from over. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next episode. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our series on the Roman conquest of Britain. Last time, we explored the reign of Caligula and his bizarre, theatrical attempt at an invasion that ended with soldiers collecting seashells. After Caligula's assassination, Rome was thrown into chaos. From this turmoil, an unlikely figure emerged as the new emperor, Claudius. Often underestimated, mocked for his physical infirmities, and kept out of the public eye, Claudius now held the fate of the Roman Empire in his hands. He needed a way to secure his precarious position, to prove his strength, and to leave a legacy worthy of an emperor. His gaze, like Caesar and Caligula before him, turned north across the sea, to the mysterious and unconquered island of Britannia. This time, however, it would not be a false start. This time, Rome was coming for good. The decision to invade Britain was not a simple one. It was a massive undertaking fraught with immense risk, and the debate raged within Claudius's inner circle. For the first time in nearly a century, Rome was seriously contemplating a full-scale conquest of the island. The military and political planning began in earnest, a colossal logistical puzzle. How many legions would be needed? What kind of naval support was required? Where would they land? What was the political situation among the British tribes? These were the questions that dominated the discussions in the halls of power on the Palatine Hill. Britain was still seen by many as a land at the very edge of the known world, a place of myth and danger. The costs would be astronomical, and the potential for catastrophic failure was high. Was it worth it? The generals and senators advising Claudius were divided. On one side were the cautious voices, the pragmatists. They pointed to the immense challenges. Crossing the Oceanus Britannicus, the English Channel, was notoriously treacherous. The weather was unpredictable, the currents strong. They remembered the near disasters faced by Caesar's fleet. What if a storm destroyed their invasion force before it even landed? The financial cost was another major concern. An invasion and subsequent occupation would drain the Roman treasury for decades. They argued that the resources could be better used to consolidate existing borders like the Rhine or the Danube, where threats were more immediate. To them, Britain was a costly distraction, a vanity project with little strategic value. The potential gains, some tin, grain, and slaves, seemed paltry compared to the enormous risks. On the other side were the hawks, the ambitious and aggressive commanders. They saw Britain not as a risk, but as an opportunity. A successful conquest would bring immense glory, or gloria, to the emperor, and to Rome itself. It would finish the job that the divine Julius Caesar had started. Prominent generals like Aulus Plautius argued that the British tribes were fragmented and could be defeated one by one. They likely had intelligence from traders and exiles about the rivalries between powerful tribes like the Cadivellani and the Aeterbates, seeing these divisions as weaknesses to be exploited. A conquest would also provide a new vast territory for settlement, resources, and crucially, a triumphant military victory to solidify Claudius's shaky grip on power. For these men, the potential glory and expansion far outweighed the dangers. The political calculus for Claudius himself was complex. As an emperor who had come to power unexpectedly, without a distinguished military career, he desperately needed a major victory to earn the respect of the army and the Senate. A successful war was the traditional way for a new emperor to establish his authority. Conquering a land that even Caesar hadn't fully subdued would be a monumental achievement. It would silence his critics and prove that he was not the weak, bumbling figure his enemies portrayed him to be. Furthermore, internal strife among the British tribes provided the perfect pretext. A cry for help from a displaced British king named Verica of the Aeterbates, who had fled to Rome, gave Claudius the official justification he needed. He could frame the invasion not as naked aggression, but as a righteous act of restoring a friendly king to his throne and bringing Roman order to a chaotic land. The debate continued, but Claudius's mind was made up. He needed this victory. The political necessity of securing his reign trumped the military and financial risks. The decision was formalized. Rome would invade Britannia. A massive force of 4 legions, the 2nd Augusta, the 9th Hispana, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria Victrix was assembled, totaling around 40,000 men, including auxiliaries. This was a significant portion of the entire Roman army, a clear signal of Claudius's commitment. Aulus Plautius, a respected and experienced senator, was appointed to command the invasion. The shipyards went into overdrive, constructing a fleet of hundreds of transport ships and warships. The logistical machine of the Roman Empire, honed over centuries of conquest, roared to life. Supplies were gathered, troops were marched to the coast of Gaul, and an entire army prepared to cross the sea. But then, a problem arose. The soldiers themselves hesitated. The prospect of crossing the ocean to fight in a strange, misty land at the edge of the world terrified them. They had heard tales of Britain, a place of fierce warriors and dark magic. This was not just another campaign in Gaul or Germany. It was a journey into the unknown. The troops, gathered at Boulogne, mutinied. They refused to board the ships. It was a moment of crisis that threatened to derail the entire invasion before it had even begun. Plautius struggled to restore order. The situation was so dire that Claudius had to dispatch one of his most trusted advisors, the freedman Narcissus, to address the legions. It was an unprecedented move, a former slave addressing Roman legionaries. At first they mocked him, but Narcissus's speech, reminding them of their duty and the glory that awaited, eventually shamed them into obedience. The mutiny was over. The army was ready. With the legions back in line, the invasion fleet finally set sail in 43 AD. But the final, and perhaps most significant, part of the plan was yet to be revealed. Claudius had decided that he would not simply direct the conquest from the comfort of Rome. Once Aulus Plautius had established a secure beachhead and engaged the enemy, Claudius himself would travel to Britain. He would lead the final push against the main British stronghold of Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. He even brought war elephants with him, a display of overwhelming power meant to shock and awe the Britons. This was the ultimate political move. By appearing on the battlefield, Claudius would personally claim the victory. He would return to Rome not just as the emperor who ordered a conquest, but as Claudius Britannicus, the conqueror of Britain. The plan was audacious, risky, and brilliant. The stage was set for one of the most significant events in Roman and British history. The preparations were complete. A massive, experienced Roman army, its brief hesitation overcome, was now crossing the Channel. The British tribes, powerful but divided, were largely unaware of the storm about to break over their island. And in Rome, an underestimated emperor was betting his entire legacy on this one great gamble. In our next chapter, we will follow the Roman legions as they land on the shores of Kent and begin the bloody, brutal, and world-changing conquest of Britain. Join us as the invasion begins. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this journey through history, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts. See you in the next video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our journey through the annals of history. Last time, we left the Roman Empire at a fascinating crossroads. Today, we resetting sail across the turbulent waters of the English Channel to witness one of the most ambitious military campaigns in Roman history, the conquest of Britain. So grab your gear because we're joining the legions for Chapter 11. Our story begins in the year 43 CE. The Emperor Claudius, often underestimated and ridiculed by his contemporaries, is on the throne in Rome. He needs a grand military victory to solidify his power and silence his critics. And what better prize than the mysterious, resource-rich island that had defied even the great Julius Caesar almost a century earlier? Britain. Unlike Caesar's earlier expeditions, which were more like reconnaissance missions, this was a full-scale invasion. Claudius assembled a formidable force, 4 legions totaling around 20,000 elite legionaries, plus another 20,000 auxiliary troops. This was a serious commitment. The command was given to a distinguished and capable senator, Aulus Plautius. Imagine the scene. A fleet of hundreds of ships gathering on the coast of Gaul, soldiers polishing their armor, the air thick with anticipation and the salty spray of the sea. For many of these men, Britain was the edge of the known world. A land of mists, fierce warriors, and strange druidic rites. Their journey across the Channel was not without drama. In fact, the troops nearly mutinied, terrified of crossing the ocean to fight in a world they considered beyond the realm of civilization. It took the intervention of a high-ranking freedman, Narcissus, sent by Claudius, to shame them into action. Can you believe it? A former slave had to rally the might of Rome's legions. With their resolve stiffened, they finally set sail in 3 divisions, landing on the shores of Kent in southeastern Britain. The invasion had begun. The Romans expected immediate, fierce resistance right on the beaches. But strangely, the coast was clear. The British tribes, a fractured collection of clans led by chieftains, were caught off guard. They hadn't believed the Romans would actually come. This initial miscalculation gave Aulus Plautius a crucial advantage, allowing him to establish a secure beachhead and begin his push inland. But the quiet didn't last long. The main resistance was led by 2 brothers, Togodumnus and Caratacus, sons of a powerful king who had ruled the Catuvellani tribe. They were charismatic, brave, and determined to drive the invaders back into the sea. What followed was not a single decisive battle, but a grueling campaign of running fights, ambushes in dense forests, and pitched battles across the rivers of southern Britain. The first major obstacle was the River Medway. Here, the Romans and the Britons fought a ferocious 2-day battle. The Britons, confident in their knowledge of the terrain, assumed the Romans couldn't cross the river in full armor. They were wrong. Claudius sent his specialized Batavian auxiliaries, fierce warriors from the Rhine Delta, swimming across the river to attack the Britons' chariot horses, causing chaos in their ranks. While the Britons were disoriented, the famous Legio II Augusta, commanded by a future emperor you might have heard of, Vespasian, forded the river and hit the main British force. The battle was a bloody, hard-won victory for the Romans. Togodumnus was killed, a huge blow to British morale. Caratacus, however, escaped. He would become a thorn in Rome's side for years to come, a legendary resistance leader whose story we will definitely cover in detail later. With the main British army shattered, Plautius pushed on towards the River Thames and the Catuvellonian capital, Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. This was the strategic prize. Securing it would mean breaking the back of the most powerful tribe in the south. At this pivotal moment, Aulus Plautius did something very clever. Instead of trying to force a final, risky assault, he paused and sent a message back to Rome. He summoned the Emperor Claudius himself to come and personally lead the final stage of the conquest. This was brilliant political theater. It ensured that the emperor, not the general, would receive the ultimate glory for the victory. And so, Claudius, who had likely never commanded an army in the field before, made the long journey from Rome to Britain. He even brought war elephants with him, an incredible sight that must have been utterly terrifying and alien to the British warriors. The arrival of the emperor with his Praetorian Guard and his elephants was a massive show of imperial power. With the emperor present, the final assault on Camulodunum was launched. Faced with the full might of the Roman army and the emperor himself, the remaining British resistance collapsed. Claudius entered the tribal capital in triumph. In a grand ceremony, several British chieftains formally submitted to him, acknowledging the power of Rome. Claudius didn't stay long. After just 16 days in Britain, he returned to Rome a hero. The Senate awarded him a magnificent triumph and the honorary title, Britannicus. He had achieved what even the divine Julius Caesar could not. He had added a new province to the Roman Empire, securing his legacy and strengthening his grip on power. But for the legions left behind under Aulus Plautius, the job was far from over. The victory at Camulodunum was just the beginning. The southeast was largely pacified, but the rest of the island, the rugged hills of Wales, the vast untamed north, remained unconquered. The Roman army would spend the next several decades in a constant state of warfare, pushing the frontiers of their new province ever outward. They would build forts, roads, and cities, slowly but surely transforming the face of Britain forever. The invasion of 43 CE was a masterclass in Roman military logistics, engineering, and adaptability. It demonstrated their ability to project power across the sea and defeat determined enemies on unfamiliar ground. It was also a story of alliances, as some British tribes chose to side with Rome, seeing them as a powerful ally against their traditional rivals. This divide-and-conquer strategy was a classic Roman tactic and proved incredibly effective in Britain. The conquest was a brutal, transformative event that would shape the destiny of the island for the next 4 centuries. It brought Roman law, language, architecture, and culture to a land on the very edge of their world, creating a unique Romano-British society whose legacy can still be seen today in the ruins of Hadrian's Wall, the baths at Bath, and the straight lines of Roman roads that still crisscross the countryside. And that's where we'll leave the story for today. The conquest has begun, but the fight for Britain is far from over. Join us next time as we explore the continuing Roman campaigns, the establishment of the new province, and the rise of one of history's most famous female warriors who would challenge Rome as power like no one before, Boudica. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to continue our journey through history, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll see you next time. Welcome back to our series on the life of Claudius. Last time, we left him on the shores of Britain, having secured a swift and decisive victory. Now it's time for the grand finale, the moment every Roman general dreamed of, the triumph. In 44 AD, after a mere 16 days in Britain, Claudius returned to Rome not as the stammering, limping figure of ridicule, but as a conquering hero. This wasn't just a military parade. It was a political masterpiece, meticulously designed to cement his authority and rewrite his own story. For an emperor who had taken power under a cloud of suspicion and intrigue, this was his chance to finally, truly, become Imperator *. Imagine the scene. The streets of Rome, packed with cheering crowds, are a riot of color and sound. For days, the city has been buzzing with anticipation. This isn't just any triumph. This is the first major expansion of the empire since Augustus, a conquest of a mystical fog-shrouded island at the very edge of the known world. And leading the procession is the man nobody believed could do it. The city held its breath, ready to witness the spectacle that would define Claudius' reign and change the perception of the empire forever. The procession itself was a breathtaking display of Roman power and the sheer strangeness of the newly conquered land. At the head of the parade weren't just soldiers, but a living tableau of Britain. Captured British chieftains and their families, clad in their native attire, were marched through the streets. For the average Roman who had only heard of Britons in myths and legends, this was like seeing creatures from another world. It made the abstract idea of conquest tangible, real, and incredibly impressive. These weren't just defeated enemies. They were symbols of Claudius's reach, proof that his power extended beyond the civilized world and into the realm of legend. But it wasn't just people. The Romans loved exotic spectacle, and Claudius delivered. Imagine the gasps of the crowd as strange animals. Perhaps massive British hunting dogs or other creatures unfamiliar to the Mediterranean world were paraded through the city. And these weren't just trophies. They were a zoological exhibition of a new Roman province. Wagons groaned under the weight of captured British war chariots, weapons, and beautifully crafted artifacts. Each item told a story of a fierce and unfamiliar culture now brought to heel by Roman might, all under the command of the once underestimated Claudius. This was propaganda at its most effective, a moving museum of victory for all to see. Of course, the centerpiece of any triumph was the army. The legions who had fought in Britain marched with pride, their standards gleaming in the Italian sun. Each soldier was a testament to the discipline and strength of the Roman military machine. But this parade had a special significance. The soldiers weren't just celebrating a victory. They were celebrating their emperor. Claudius, who had never commanded an army before, had personally gone to the front line. This act had forged a powerful bond of loyalty between him and his troops. As they marched, their cheers for Imperator Claudius weren't just ceremonial. They were genuine, a roar of approval that echoed through the Senate and silenced many of his critics. And then the man himself. Claudius rode in the triumphal chariot, a four-horse chariot known as a quadriga. He was dressed in the traditional garb of a triumphator, a purple toga embroidered with gold, his face painted red to emulate Jupiter, the king of the gods. By his side, his sons, including the young Britannicus, whose name was a permanent reminder of this very victory. This was the ultimate transformation. The man who was once hidden behind a curtain, the scholar who was mocked for his physical infirmities, was now the living embodiment of Roman victory and divine favor. The symbolism was overwhelming. He wasn't just a man. He was a vessel of Rome's destiny. This triumph was more than just a party. It was a powerful statement of legitimacy. Remember, Claudius had become emperor through the Praetorian Guard, not through traditional succession or Senate approval. Many of the old noble families still saw him as an illegitimate usurper, but how could they argue with this? How could they dismiss a man who had expanded the empire, who had the unyielding loyalty of the legions, and who had brought such glory to Rome. The triumph was a public relations coup. It washed away the stain of his irregular accession to power and replaced it with the glorious sheen of a conqueror. Even his family played a role in this carefully staged event. His wife, the powerful Messalina, followed his chariot in a covered carriage, a position of honor never before granted to an emperor's wife in a triumph. This was Claudius signaling the importance of his dynasty, of his family as central to the new imperial order. He was not just a lone ruler. He was the head of a new imperial house, securing the future of Rome through his lineage. Every detail was calculated, every gesture packed with meaning, all contributing to the image of a stable, powerful, and legitimate regime. The climax of the triumph was the ascent to the Capitoline Hill, the religious heart of Rome. There, Claudius would make sacrifices to Jupiter Optimus Maximus, formally giving thanks for the victory. In a remarkable act of humility, Claudius is said to have ascended the steps of the temple on his knees. This was a gesture of piety, showing that despite his immense power, he was still subservient to the gods. For a populace that valued tradition and divine favor, this was a masterful touch. He was the conqueror, but also a pious servant of the state and its deities, a perfect Roman in every way. The impact of the triumph was immediate and long-lasting. Claudius was awarded the honorific title Britannicus, which he passed to his son. The Senate, which had once scorned him, now tripped over itself to vote him honors, including a triumphal arch that would stand as a permanent monument to his victory. The conquest of Britain, and the spectacular triumph that celebrated it, fundamentally changed how Claudius was perceived. He was no longer the accidental emperor. He was Claudius the Conqueror, a leader who had proven his worth on the battlefield and earned his place among the great Roman emperors. This day marked the true beginning of his reign, a moment of triumph in every sense of the word. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Claudius's triumph. It's a pivotal moment in his story and in the history of the Roman Empire. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. We love reading your comments, so let us know what you think below. See you next time. Welcome back to our journey through the annals of Rome. If you thought the reigns of Augustus, Tiberius, and Caligula were filled with drama, you haven't seen anything yet. Today, we're diving headfirst into the chaotic, scandalous, and downright treacherous world of Emperor Claudius's household. Forget reality TV. This is the original high-stakes family drama. Claudius, the scholar emperor who was never supposed to rule, found himself at the center of a storm, and much of it was brewing right under his own roof. His personal life was a revolving door of intrigue, marked by a series of marriages that were anything but stable. He had a knack for choosing partners who were ambitious, intelligent, and, as it turned out, dangerously opportunistic. His first notable marriage as emperor was to the infamous Valeria Messalina. Young, beautiful, and with an insatiable appetite for power and pleasure, Messalina's name has become synonymous with scandal. While Claudius was busy running the empire, Messalina was allegedly running her own court of lovers and conspirators. She used her position to eliminate rivals, accumulate wealth, and indulge in behavior so outrageous that even the Roman elite, who were no strangers to excess, were shocked. The stories about her are wild, painting a picture of an empress who turned the imperial palace into her personal playground. But her ambition was her undoing. The final straw came when she committed an act of unbelievable audacity. While Claudius was away, Messalina went through a public marriage ceremony with one of her lovers, the senator Gaius Silius. Was it a drunken prank, a symbolic coup, or a genuine attempt to overthrow her husband? Historians are still debating. But when the news reached Claudius, his hand was forced. His most trusted freedmen, Narcissus and Pallas, convinced him of the mortal danger he was in. Messalina and her lover were executed without delay. Claudius, ever the detached ruler, reportedly showed little emotion and simply asked for another cup of wine at dinner that evening. The first major storm in his household had passed, but a far more cunning and dangerous one was gathering on the horizon. With Messalina gone, the question of Claudius's next wife became a matter of state. His powerful freedmen each backed a different candidate, vying for influence over the emperor. But one candidate had a unique and, frankly, unsettling advantage: Agrippina the Younger. She was not only a descendant of Augustus but also Claudius's own niece. Yes, you heard that right. A marriage between an uncle and a niece was considered incestuous and was illegal under Roman law, but Agrippina was a force of nature. She was intelligent, politically savvy, and utterly ruthless. She had survived the purges of her brother Caligula's reign, and was determined not just to be an empress, but to be a co-ruler. She charmed Claudius, and with some clever political maneuvering and a special decree from the Senate to legalize the union, she became his fourth wife. This wasn't a marriage of love. It was a merger of power. From the moment she entered the palace, Agrippina began to systematically consolidate her influence. Unlike Messalina, who sought pleasure, Agrippina sought absolute control. She was granted the title of Augusta, a rare honor that put her on nearly equal footing with the emperor. She appeared on coinage alongside Claudius and even wrote her own memoirs. She skillfully purged the court of anyone loyal to Messalina or anyone who might stand in her way. She had a clear goal in mind, and it centered on her son from a previous marriage, a young boy named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. You might know him by his later name, Nero. And this brings us to the heart of the tragedy, the dark shadow of succession that fell over Claudius's final years. Claudius had his own biological son, Britannicus, the child he had with Messalina. By all rights, Britannicus was the natural heir. He was the emperor's son, a direct descendant of the Julio-Claudian line. But Agrippina had other plans. Her entire strategy was to elevate Nero above Britannicus. She persuaded Claudius to formally adopt Nero, who was older than Britannicus, giving him a claim to the throne. Nero was suddenly front and center. He was given honors, titles, and public responsibilities far beyond his years. He was married to Claudius's daughter, Octavia, further cementing his connection to the imperial family. The brilliant philosopher Seneca was brought back from exile to be his tutor, crafting the image of a cultured and capable future leader. Meanwhile, Britannicus was systematically sidelined. He was treated like a child, kept out of the public eye, and his supporters at court were either removed or intimidated into silence. Imagine the tension in the palace. Two young boys, one the son of the emperor, the other the stepson, being pushed against each other in a deadly Game of Thrones orchestrated by an ambitious mother. Claudius, growing older and perhaps weary of the constant political battles within his own home, seemed either unwilling or unable to stop Agrippina's relentless campaign. There are hints, however, that in his final days, Claudius began to realize his mistake. Some ancient sources suggest he started showing renewed affection for his own son, Britannicus, and may have been planning to name him as his true heir. He was overheard muttering that it was his fate to bear with his wife's misdeeds, and then to punish them. Was he planning to get rid of Agrippina, just as he had Messalina? We'll never know for sure. Because before he could act, Claudius died suddenly in 54 AD. The official cause was old age and ill health. But virtually every ancient historian points the finger directly at Agrippina. The most famous story claims she served him a dish of his favorite mushrooms, laced with a potent poison. When the first dose didn't work quickly enough, his doctor, a conspirator of Agrippina's, allegedly finished the job with a poisoned feather, pretending to help him vomit. With Claudius dead, Agrippina and her allies moved swiftly. Britannicus and his sisters were locked away in their rooms while Nero, guided by the Praetorian prefect, was presented to the guards and proclaimed the new emperor. Agrippina's long-term plan had come to its stunning and successful conclusion. She had outmaneuvered everyone, betrayed her husband and uncle, and placed her 17-year-old son on the most powerful throne in the world. But as we'll see next time, creating an emperor is one thing. Controlling him is another entirely. The intrigues of Claudius's household were over, but the reign of Nero had just begun, and it would usher in an era of even greater turmoil. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this dive into Roman family drama as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter on the rise of Nero. See you next time. Welcome back to our series on the Roman emperors. Today we're diving into chapter 14, exploring a side of Emperor Claudius that often gets overshadowed by palace intrigue and military campaigns. Claudius, the historian. Imagine the most powerful man in the world, not just ruling an empire, but also spending his nights hunched over scrolls, meticulously documenting the past. That was Claudius. Long before he ever dreamt of wearing the imperial purple, he was a scholar, a man deeply in love with history. And even after his unexpected rise to power, that passion never faded. It wasn't just a hobby. It was the lens through which he viewed the world and his own role in it. Claudius wasn't just a casual reader. He was a prolific author. Think about the sheer dedication it would take. He penned a massive 20-volume history of the Etruscans, that mysterious and influential civilization that preceded Rome on the Italian peninsula. He didn't stop there. He wrote an 8-volume history of Carthage, Rome's greatest rival. He even wrote a book about the Roman alphabet, proposing new letters to better capture the sounds of the Latin language. This wasn't just trivia for him. Understanding the Etruscans and the Carthaginians was about understanding the very roots of Roman identity and the struggles that had forged the Republic and Empire. This deep historical knowledge wasn't just locked away in his library. It actively shaped his policies as emperor. When Claudius made decisions about law, citizenship, or provincial administration, he wasn't just reacting to the present moment. He was drawing on centuries of precedent, on the successes and failures of his predecessors. He saw Rome not as a static entity, but as a living, evolving organism with a deep and complex past. For example, his decision to grant citizenship to certain Gallic nobles was controversial at the time. Many senators were horrified at the idea of barbarians joining their ranks. But Claudius, in a famous speech preserved on a bronze tablet, argued his case from a historical perspective. He reminded the Senate that Rome's strength had always come from its ability to incorporate new peoples. He pointed out that many of their own ancestors were not originally from the city of Rome, but from other parts of Italy. He was essentially saying, look at our own history. This is who we are. We grow by welcoming others. This wasn't just a political move, it was a history lesson delivered from the throne. His public works projects also reflected this historical mindset. The construction of the port of Ostia, a massive engineering feat, wasn't just about solving Rome's grain shortage. It was about securing the city's lifeline, a problem that had plagued Roman leaders for generations. Claudius understood the historical significance of the grain supply and its connection to social stability. He was solving a contemporary problem by looking at it through the long lens of history. This is what makes Claudius so fascinating. He was a ruler who thought deeply about Rome's past while actively shaping its future. His historical writings, most of which are tragically lost to us, would have offered an unparalleled insight into the Roman world, seen through the eyes of one of its most unlikely and intellectual leaders. He understood that to lead Rome forward, he first had to understand where it had been. He wasn't just an emperor who happened to like history. He was a historian who happened to become emperor. His work on the Etruscans is particularly tantalizing. The Etruscans were a vibrant, sophisticated culture, and much of what we know about them comes from their tombs and the writings of Romans who often viewed them as rivals. Claudius, however, likely had access to sources that have long since vanished. He may have even been able to read the Etruscan language. Imagine what his books could tell us about their religion, their society, their origins. The loss of these works is one of the great what-ifs for ancient historians. The same goes for his history of Carthage. For centuries, Rome defined itself against its Punic enemy. To have a detailed history written by a Roman emperor, someone with access to state archives, and a unique perspective on power and conflict would be priceless. It would give us a more nuanced view of the Punic Wars and the relationship between these two ancient superpowers. So, when we think of Claudius, let's remember not just the stammering, limping figure from popular fiction or the conqueror of Britain. Let's also remember the scholar, the man who, amidst the immense pressures of running an empire, still found the time and the passion to preserve the stories of the past. He was a bridge between the world of scholarship and the world of power, a true historian emperor who understood that history isn't just about what happened but about what it means for who we are and where we are going. Claudius reminds us that the best leaders are often the best students of the past. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of Claudius the historian. If you found this perspective interesting, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next chapter. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time. Hey everyone, and welcome back to our deep dive into the lives of the Roman emperors. We've journeyed with Claudius through his unexpected rise, his stumbles, his surprising successes, and his tumultuous personal life. Now we arrive at the final dramatic chapter, the end of his reign and the shaping of his legacy. When we last left Claudius, he had executed his wife Messalina and, in a move that would seal his fate, married his own niece, Agrippina the Younger. This wasn't just a marriage. It was a political merger. Agrippina was ambitious, cunning, and laser-focused on one goal: securing the throne for her son from a previous marriage, a young man named Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, whom we know better by his later name, Nero. The final years of Claudius's reign saw his authority slowly but surely eroded from within. Agrippina was a master of court politics. She systematically placed her allies in key positions, from the Praetorian Guard to the imperial administration. She persuaded Claudius to formally adopt Nero, giving him precedence over Claudius's own biological son, Britannicus. Every move was a chess piece, positioning Nero closer to the throne while isolating Claudius and his natural heir. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius paint a picture of an aging emperor, perhaps weary from decades of political survival, increasingly manipulated by his powerful wife. He was surrounded by her loyalists, his every decision filtered through her influence. The vibrant, if eccentric, scholar emperor who had once defied all expectations was now caught in a web spun by the very person who should have been his closest ally. The Roman court, always a snake pit of intrigue, had become more dangerous than ever for Claudius. Agrippina, having been granted the unprecedented title of Augusta, even began appearing on coins alongside him, a clear signal of her power. She wasn't just the emperor's wife. She was a co-ruler in all but name. While Agrippina consolidated her power, Claudius continued with his duties. He oversaw judicial matters and administrative projects, but the energy and decisiveness of his early reign seemed to be fading. He was aware of the shifting loyalties. There are accounts that in his final months, Claudius began to show favor once again to his own son, Britannicus, perhaps realizing the monster he had unleashed by adopting Nero. He was reportedly heard lamenting his marriages and muttering that it was his fate to bear with the wickedness of his wives, and then to punish it. This suggests a dawning tragic awareness. Did he realize that by favoring Nero, he had signed his own son's death warrant, and perhaps his own? This brings us to the fateful night of October 13, 54 AD. The story of Claudius's death is one of history's great murder mysteries. The official cause was old age and ill health, but almost no ancient source believes it. The overwhelming consensus points to poison, and the prime suspect? Agrippina. The most famous account, detailed by Tacitus, is chilling. Agrippina, fearing that Claudius was about to reverse course and name Britannicus as his true heir, decided she had to act fast. The chosen weapon was a poison, often said to be derived from mushrooms, a dish Claudius particularly loved. The setting was a palace banquet. A plate of choice mushrooms was served to the emperor. The poison was allegedly administered by Halotus, his official taster who was in on the plot. But the initial dose wasn't fatal. It only made Claudius violently ill. As he writhed in agony, Agrippina had a backup plan. She called for the court physician, Xenophon. Pretending to help Claudius vomit, the physician supposedly used a feather dipped in a second, faster-acting poison and touched it to the back of the emperor's throat, finishing the job. It was a brutal, intimate, and terrifyingly efficient plot. Claudius, the survivor, the man who had outlasted Caligula in countless conspiracies, was dead at the age of 63. Immediately, the plan Agrippina had spent years preparing swung into action. The palace was locked down. News of the emperor's death was suppressed while Nero, guided by the Praetorian prefect Burrus and Agrippina, appointee, was presented to the guards. With promises of a generous bonus, the Praetorian Guard acclaimed Nero as the new emperor. By the time the Senate and the public learned of Claudius's death, his successor was already a done deal. Britannicus, the rightful heir, was sidelined, and would himself be murdered by Nero a few years later. The transfer of power was seamless, a testament to Agrippina's ruthless planning. So, how do we remember Claudius? His immediate legacy was sadly one of mockery. Upon his death, he was deified, officially declared a god, as was common for emperors. But this was likely a cynical move by Nero and Agrippina to legitimize the transition. Behind the scenes, the ridicule that had followed Claudius his whole life continued. The philosopher Seneca, who had been exiled by Claudius and recalled by Agrippina, wrote a scathing satire called the *Apocolocynsis*, or the pumpkinification of Claudius. It brutally mocks Claudius's physical infirmities and his scholarly pursuits, portraying his arrival in the afterlife as a complete farce where the gods can't stand him. For a time, this was the prevailing image: Claudius the fool, the stammering, clumsy emperor. But history has a longer memory. As the disastrous reign of Nero unfolded, people began to look back on Claudius's time with a new appreciation. They remembered a period of relative stability and effective governance. And as the centuries passed, a more balanced and impressive picture emerged. Claudius's legacy is far grander than his detractors would have you believe. First, he was a builder and an administrator. He completed two massive aqueducts, the Aqua Claudia and the Anna Novis, which significantly improved Rome's water supply. He built a new port at Ostia, a massive engineering feat that solved the critical problem of supplying the city of Rome with grain, reducing the risk of famine and riots. He was a hands-on judge, personally hearing countless legal cases, and he reformed the financial systems of the empire. He was an administrator who, for all his quirks, got things done. Second, and perhaps most famously, Claudius was a conqueror. He succeeded where even Julius Caesar had failed. In 43 AD, he launched the successful and permanent conquest of Britannia. It was a huge military undertaking, and Claudius even traveled to the new province himself to oversee the final victory. This was no small feat. It brought a massive, resource-rich territory into the Roman fold and expanded the empire to its furthest northwest extent. For centuries, Britain would be a Roman province, a direct result of the ambition of the emperor everyone had underestimated. Finally, there is the legacy of the man himself. Claudius is a testament to the idea that strength comes in many forms. He wasn't a traditional Roman strongman. He wasn't a great general or a charismatic orator. He was a scholar, a historian, an administrator who was thrust into a role no one thought he could handle. And yet, he not only survived, he largely succeeded. He governed with a sense of duty, even if he was often clumsy in his methods and tragically poor in his judgment of character, especially in his wives. He was a complex, contradictory figure, intelligent yet easily manipulated, decisive in public works yet indecisive in his own home, a conqueror of nations who was ultimately conquered by his own court. But he should not be remembered as the fool Seneca portrayed. He should be remembered as the emperor who expanded the map, who gave Rome water and food, and who proved that even the most unlikely candidate could leave a lasting mark on the world. His reign was a crucial bridge between the chaos of Caligula and the tyranny of Nero, a period of surprising competence that stands as one of the most fascinating chapters in Roman history. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the life of Emperor Claudius. It's been an incredible story to tell. If you've enjoyed this series, please hit that like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss our next historical deep dive. Let me know in the comments what you think Claudius's greatest legacy was. Until next time, stay curious,